Fallout is full of people who do terrible things, and most of them have a reason. These ones are different, and the difference isn't the kill count, or even the method. It's something more specific that this list is going to try to name by the time we get to the end. That's the actual goal here. Not just going through a list of bad people, but getting onto something that's true about what makes certain kinds of evil worse than others. Keep one question in mind as we go. Why is the last character on this list more dangerous than any of the others, even though some of the others killed more people? The answer is in the structure of the list itself, so let's start at the very bottom. Alistair, Tenpenny. Tenpenny is the absolute floor of this list, and every character below is worse, which tells you something, because he's already pretty bad. Tenpenny Tower is a fortified luxury high-rise in the capital Wasteland, built by a pre-war British weapons dealer named Alistair Tenpenny, who survived the bombs and spent his considerable wealth reconstructing a comfortable life, while everyone else in the Wasteland scraped by in the ruins below him, and he shoots Wastelanders from his balcony for sport, sniper rifle, and afternoon hobby, and that is not even a metaphor. On the surface, he's almost too easy to dismiss, honestly. With his cartoonish accent and visible contempt for literally everyone below him, the kind of villain you clock immediately and stop taking seriously. Then you spend time with his quest, and the contempt stops being funny. A man named Mr. Burke approaches you on Tenpenny's behalf with the single request: destroy Megaton, the settlement built around an undetonated nuclear bomb near the tower, not because it poses a threat, not even because there's any strategic value in doing it, but because Tenpenny can see it from his balcony and the view bothers him. If you agree, you push a button in his penthouse while he watches from the window, raises a glass, and calls it a moment of history, and every person in Megaton dies while he toasts the explosion with genuine passion. The way someone celebrates something they've been quietly wanting for a long time, and he genuinely isn't performing satisfaction, he means it. And that happiness, the delight of the thing, is the part that sticks. The Roy Phillips questline adds the other layer, and this is the part that really gets me, personally. A group of ghouls denied entry to the tower on the basis of Tenpenny's prejudice eventually negotiate their way inside, a deal you can broker that feels like an actual good outcome. Integration over exclusion. Two communities finding a way. Then you come back later and find Roy Phillips has murdered every human resident while you were gone, Tenpenny included. And the most fitting punishment the game offers for blowing up Megaton is someone else getting there first. And there is no path through that quest where everyone walks away clean. And look, I want to be clear about something here, because it's easy to watch Tenpenny die at the hands of Roy Phillips and feel like the story got its closure, but it didn't. And every human in the tower is dead too. The people who had nothing to do with Megaton, the ones who just wanted to live somewhere with clean sheets, are gone, because the hatred Tenpenny cultivated in that building ran in both directions, and he never noticed or cared that it did. And that's his legacy more than the bomb, not the act, but the environment he created, and what that environment produced when he was no longer in it to actually direct any of it. That is what this character earns as his explanation. Tenpenny is evil that commits acts, personal, contained, entirely about his own preferences applied to other people's lives without any consideration for the cost, and he's never once been asked to justify himself to anyone because he's always had enough money to make that unnecessary, and he sits at the bottom of this list specifically because what comes below him is evil that builds systems. And getting that distinction clear is kind of the whole point. Tenpenny committed acts, and the next character committed one particular act in front of you specifically, and he understood exactly what it would mean to the person watching when he did it. Colonel Autumn. Not all evil announces itself loudly, and some of it just wears a uniform, uses complete sentences, and shoots your father because it's the most efficient resolution to an obstacle in the mission. Colonel Augustus Autumn commands the Enclave's capital Wasteland forces in Fallout 3, and he's also the character who kills James, the lone wanderer's father, at the exact moment the game has built you to care most about him, and the shot happens in front of you. And that is not an accident of game design or bad writing. It is entirely the point. He does it to demonstrate control, because James is an obstacle that has been resolved, and whatever that costs the person standing next to him simply isn't a variable Autumn bothers accounting for, because that capacity was optimized out of him somewhere along the institutional chain of command that produced him. Here's the thing that separates him from a simple antagonist, though, and I think this is genuinely underappreciated. Autumn is not on the same page as President Eden, his nominal superior. Eden wants to introduce modified FEV into Project Purity's water supply and eliminate every everyone in the capital wasteland who carries radiation-induced genetic mutations, which in practice means essentially everyone. Autumn thinks that's wasteful and counterproductive. He wants to control the water, not poison it, because a population that depends on Enclave-controlled water is a population that owes something for the privilege every single day. He wants subjects, not a cleared map. Eden's plan is a genocide, while Autumn's is a permanent authoritarian hold on the one resource nobody can live without. Two genuinely different kinds of evil running parallel inside the same organization. And honestly, Autumn's is the more sustainable model, and it's also the more insidious one, because it doesn't look like extinction from the outside, it looks like governance. I keep coming back to the specific choice to shoot James in front of his child rather than somewhere the child wouldn't see it, and there is no operational reason for that choice specifically, since James was going to die either way, and doing it in front of the lone wanderer is a message, a demonstration that the Enclave does not consider your emotional response to its decisions a constraint on those decisions, and Autumn is telling you, in the most direct language available, that you are not a stakeholder in what happens here, just a variable. And that's what the scene is actually communicating beyond the plot mechanics of it, and that's what makes it land the way it does. That detail about sustainability is what makes him more disturbing than Tenpenny over time, because Tenpenny's evil required his personal presence and ended when he did. But Autumn's was scalable, transferable, institutional, and if the Enclave had won the Capital Wasteland campaign, his water control plan had a future that could have outlasted him by generations. And that's the first real step toward a system, and systems are much harder to stop than people. Autumn wanted to own the wasteland through its water. The next character wanted to save it by replacing everyone in it, and he believed that so completely and with such genuine conviction that he never once stopped to check whether it would actually work. The Master. This is where the list stops being about people who did cruel things for reasons you can at least follow, because Richard Gray is something harder to categorize. And the difficulty is kind of the point. He was a caravan trader who was captured by the automated security system still running at Mariposa Military Base in the early post-war years and thrown into the FEV vats, and over days and weeks, unable to escape, he transformed, his body losing its fixed form, starting to absorb biological material around him, driven not by any conscious choice, but by what the FEV had remade him as. And by the time he finally emerged, the process was already running, and it did not stop. He built a throne in a demonstration vault beneath the cathedral in Los Angeles, connected himself to its systems, and literally incorporated the structure into his body over time, and he called himself the Master, developed psychic abilities from the sheer accumulated neural tissue, built a super mutant army beneath the city and a cult above it, the Children of the Cathedral, who ran genuine medical charities across the boneyard with no idea that the organization they worked for was providing cover for something monstrous. What I find genuinely uncomfortable about the Master, and I'm not sure the franchise fully intends this, but it's there anyway, is that his medical charity operation was real. The Children of the Cathedral were actually helping people. Real medical care, actual relief work. Not as a cynical cover, but as a genuine expression of the compassion that was still in him somewhere, operating in parallel with something monstrous in a way that should be logically impossible, but clearly wasn't, and he held both things simultaneously. The charity sincere and the plan to forcibly convert the human race equally sincere, and he didn't experience these as contradictions. His argument, and he will make it to you if you let him, is that the old human form is simply too fragile for the post-war world. Super mutants are stronger, more resilient, better built for survival in irradiated conditions. And the unity is not genocide in his framing, it's evolution. Mercy delivered through a difficult method. And here is where this list needs you to notice something. If you actually sit with that argument for a moment, you can almost follow the logic that gets a person there. You can almost trace the steps. Almost. The problem, though, is what happens when you check it. FEV renders super mutants completely sterile, meaning they cannot reproduce. And the Unity would convert all available humanity so the last generation would die out, and the plan would end the human race more thoroughly than the bombs did, just on a longer timeline with the added horror of everyone being aware of it as it happened. He never checked, just built the army, developed the psychic abilities, absorbed hundreds of people into himself, their consciousnesses still partially present and competing with his own thoughts in a fractured internal experience he had long stopped trying to resolve, and he never ran the basic biology on the thing he was spending spending all of that on. When the Vault Dweller presents the evidence, the Master agrees, sits with it quietly, checks the logic himself, and then triggers an explosion in the cathedral, because the one thing the FEV never reached was his capacity for reason, and reason, applied honestly to what he'd become and what the plan would produce, left him nothing worth continuing toward. That's what this character actually earns: genuine compassion, catastrophically wrong method, and the specific kind of negligence that comes from absolute certainty. He thought he was helping. The franchise does not let that be an excuse. Neither should we. The Master at least believed in something. The next entry is what's left when you take the belief away and keep only the capacity for violence, fully calibrated by an institution that considered the result a success. Frank Horrigan. Some evil is chosen and some is manufactured, and Horrigan is both, where the institution that made him looked at what they'd produced and gave it a promotion. Before any of this, he was just Richard, or at least that's what the Enclave records call him. An Enclave special agent with a documented psychotic incident that got him quietly reassigned to Wasteland patrol duty before any of this happened. In September 2236, an Enclave slaving squad brought Wastelanders to the ruins of Mariposa Military Base to dig out the facility by hand, and think about what that means for a second. They captured civilians and put them to work excavating ruins they knew were dangerous, because the technology buried underneath was worth more to them than the lives of the people doing the digging. When the excavation reached the buried FEV vats, the fumes contaminated everyone in the tunnels, and Horrigan was among them and was immediately pulled back to the Enclave for study. 2 years of documented experimentation followed, including extensive FEV modification. The same virus that had turned Richard Gray into the Master, applied here with surgical precision and a very specific outcome in mind. Then a specialized power armor suit was grafted directly to his skin and bone, integrated at a level that made removal impossible without killing him, and there was no off switch, no civilian mode, no version of Frank Horrigan that existed outside the armor and the role. What emerged stood over 12 feet tall, carried a plasma cannon as a sidearm, could regenerate combat damage at a rate that made conventional engagement almost pointless, and was coherent enough to follow orders. Precisely coherent enough and not 1 degree more. In Fallout 2, Horrigan is the Enclave's tool for every operation that needs force beyond what conventional soldiers can manage. He leads the abduction of Vault 13's population for FEV experimentation, kills Gruther, the leader of the intelligent Deathclaw community that had settled in Vault 13 after the original Dwellers left, with a single punch, and has the body taken for dissection without breaking stride or acknowledging it as anything worth noting. When he finally faces the Chosen One on the Poseidon oil rig, his opening line is, "You're an interesting case, Smoothskin. I enjoy my work, but it's not often I get to kill a legend." He genuinely isn't performing menace. He genuinely means it, and the wrath and the pleasure in it fused into the same indistinguishable thing somewhere in those 2 years. Here's the callback to the question planted at the start of this video, and it lands here specifically because this is where it belongs. Horrigan is the exact point where acts and systems meet. He commits acts, yes, but he was built by a system, authorized through a chain of command, deployed by an institution that reviewed the results and filed them under success. The Enclave didn't discover Horrigan, they manufactured him, and they were pleased with how it came out. The only way to kill him is to turn the Enclave's own automated defense turret systems against him, because nothing the Chosen One can bring to that confrontation independently is sufficient. The institution that built him is literally the only thing powerful enough to end him, and it can only be turned against him from within after you've already dismantled most of the command structure around it. He is not an aberration within the Enclave. He is its most honest and complete expression. Horrigan is what an institution produces when it decides one of its tools doesn't need a conscience and that this is a feature rather than a flaw. The next character had no institution at all, just decades of isolation and an intelligence that had nowhere to go except inward, and a plan that makes Horrigan look like a very localized problem. Father Elijah Hilaya wants to kill everyone on the continent, not a faction or an army or a competing ideology, but everyone currently alive. And he's not saying that dramatically for effect, he means it as a practical engineering solution to the problem of what people keep doing to each other. That is the most important thing about him, and it belongs at the front of this section, rather than buried somewhere in the middle where it's easy to lose track of. Father Elijah, former elder of the Mojave chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel, has a plan to weaponize the Sierra Madre's cloud, a toxic radioactive gas that has been killing everything in its vicinity for 2 centuries. Seed it across the Mojave, then across the NCR, then across the entire continent, and clear everyone out and rebuild under conditions he controls alone through the Sierra Madre's matter replicator, and that's the whole plan. How does someone get there? The Brotherhood of Steel is not an organization that tends to produce unconventional thinkers, and Elijah rose through it on the strength of knowing more about pre-war technology technology than anyone around him, which in Brotherhood terms meant he was valuable and left alone to work. Then, the Battle of Helios 1 in 2274 cost the Brotherhood the solar facility, a defeat that from the outside looks like one military setback among many, but from the inside clearly broke something in him that never healed properly. He abandoned the Brotherhood entirely and spent years alone in the wasteland, following technological trails nobody else had followed, teaching himself things nobody else had bothered to learn, and getting angrier with nowhere to put any of it. Decades of genuine intelligence with nowhere to go except inward. Compounding without anything to push back against it. Grievance without an outlet. The specific flavor of isolation that takes smart people and slowly turns them into something else entirely. And by the time Dead Money begins, he's been alone long enough with the idea that it doesn't register to him as extreme anymore. It registers as obvious. He trapped the courier in the Sierra Madre with an explosive collar, lied about the full scope of the plan, and fully intended to detonate it once they stopped being operationally useful, because he doesn't experience people as people. He experiences them as variables, obstacles, or tools, and the distinction stopped mattering to him somewhere in those years alone and hasn't come back. You can trap him in the Sierra Madre's vault at the end of Dead Money. The game's ending slides describe him spending years trying to get out, surrounded by every piece of pre-war technology he devoted the back half of his life to finding, and eventually starving to death in there. Dead Money delivers the kind of ending the Fallout franchise rarely manages. The punishment fits the exact specific shape of what he did. He wanted the technology above everything else, and he got it, along with nothing else, and he had forever to sit with that. Elijah wanted to clear the board entirely and start over fresh. Caesar took a different approach. He built something on the existing board instead, and whatever he built has been running for 35 years without structural signs of slowing down. Caesar. Here's the answer to the question planted at the start. Why is the last character more dangerous than any of the others, even though some of them killed more people? Because his evil runs on infrastructure, and infrastructure tends to outlast the people who built it. Every entry above has a kill count that ends somewhere, with Tenpenny's ending when he did, the Master's ending in the cathedral explosion, Horrigan's ending on the oil rig, and Elijah's contained by the physical geography of the Sierra Madre, and Caesar's is still running in 2281, still producing casualties, still expanding in certain directions, and that is the specific thing that puts him at the top of this list. There's a specific detail about Caesar that I think gets underplayed in most discussions of him, which is that he hid the books. He hid the actual Roman history texts that inspired the entire legion from his own followers, and told them the structure was divinely invented, which means the people living and dying under his system didn't even get to know what it was built on. He took the source material, the thing that might have given them context for what he was building and why, and locked it away so the mythology could run clean, and that's not just cruelty. It's an author who doesn't want his readers to check the footnotes. Edward Sallow was born in 2226 in the New California Republic, raised by the followers of the Apocalypse, a humanitarian organization whose entire institutional purpose was preserving knowledge and providing medical care across the wasteland. He was educated in history, linguistics, medical theory, and the core belief that knowledge existed specifically to repair what the bombs had broken. By every early indicator, he was exactly the kind of person the followers were designed to produce. In 2246, he was sent east to the Grand Canyon on an expedition to study tribal languages. His group was captured by the Blackfoot tribe, who were losing a simultaneous war against 7 competing tribes and genuinely close to total collapse. Sallow taught them firearms maintenance, small unit tactics, explosives manufacturing, and the Roman military principle of divide and conquer, drawn from history books he had been obsessing over for years. He did this despite the explicit objections of the other expedition members, because he had already decided he understood the situation better than anyone else in the room, which would turn out to be the most characteristic decision he ever made. The Blackfoots won, and every tribe they faced was absorbed or destroyed, and here's the mini reveal this section earns. Sallow didn't stay at a distance to watch what he'd set in motion, he became it, and he declared himself Caesar, took the name of the Roman dictator whose writings he'd been treating as a personal instruction manual, and spent the next 3.5 decades building a civilization that runs on slavery, crucifixion as a deliberate and calculated infrastructure of terror, and the structural dehumanization of women baked into its founding documents as policy, not as a side effect or an implementation failure, but as a considered architectural choice made at the beginning. The crosses crosses along the Legion's roads are the detail that lands hardest once you understand what they're actually for. The Legion doesn't crucify enemies as punishment. It crucifies them at roadsides where travelers will see them from a distance, so that the sight carries the message further and faster than any messenger could, and the crosses are communication infrastructure. And Caesar understands the difference between violence and the strategic communication of violence, and he uses both with equal deliberateness and equal sophistication. Joshua Graham co-founded the Legion with him from the very beginning, led the assault on the NCR at the First Battle of Hoover Dam in 2277, and lost. Caesar had Graham covered in pitch, set on fire, and thrown into the Grand Canyon. Graham survived, which Caesar presumably did not expect, and eventually became the burned man of Fallout, New Vegas' Honest Hearts DLC, which is its own extraordinary story. But the point isn't that Caesar is cruel, we already knew that. The point is that burning your most loyal general alive and throwing him into a canyon over a military loss is an ego decision, not a strategic one. The ideology is real, and it's genuinely held, and it's also a housing for something considerably simpler underneath it. By 2281, Caesar is dying of a brain tumor he refuses to have treated, because accepting help from Dr. Arcade Gannon of the Followers of the Apocalypse, the one person in the Mojave with the qualifications to help him, would mean admitting vulnerability, and he doesn't do that. Joshua Sawyer, the lead designer of New Vegas, described Caesar's karma alignment as neutral, not because he was balanced between good and evil, but because whatever moral framework Edward Sallow once had simply disintegrated after decades of being Caesar. The category had stopped applying. He no longer has access to the person who might have found any of this troubling. The system he built outlasts him, and he knows it, and he considers it his greatest work. Tenpenny's tower fell when Tenpenny died, and that was that. The Legion shouldn't really fall completely when Caesar dies, and there's a reasonable argument it becomes more stable without him, because institutions tend to outlast the egos that required them to remain personally central, and the difference between those two outcomes is the entire argument this list has been building toward. Honorable mentions. 6 on the main list, with a few others close enough to be worth naming before we close. Benny shot the courier and buried them in a shallow grave outside Goodsprings, which is genuinely bad, but Benny's motivation is ambition rather than cruelty in any meaningful structural sense, and he's small-scale by this list's standards, and New Vegas uses him specifically as a contrast to the larger players in the region to make that point. President Dick Richardson authorized the airborne FEV program in Fallout 2, the one that would have killed virtually every living person in the wasteland outside the Enclave's own sealed population. Scale-wise, that puts him at or near the top of any honest reckoning. He's off the main list because the franchise never gives you enough time with him for it to land as personal, and he functions as the head of a system, rather than a character you inhabit, and the distinction matters for this specific list, though I'd understand an argument for putting him on it. The think tank in Old World Blues has been running experiments on living wasteland inhabitants from Big MT for over 2 centuries, and here's a specific example of what that means in practice. The cazadores, those mutated tarantula hawk wasps that absolutely ruin your day in the Mojave, were engineered in Big MT and released into the environment. A woman named Jacqueline was killed by a swarm on the road to Novak and left behind a holotape for her friend Thomas, who went looking for her body and was killed by another swarm before he could find it. The think tank produced that chain of events and don't know they did, haven't known anything about the actual consequences of their work for more than 200 years, and they're still working. And the Enclave as an institution, not any single person, but the organization itself, was not formed after the Great War as some kind of desperate survivor response. It was a continuity of government structure that existed before the bombs fell, staffed by people who expected the war to happen and prepared accordingly, some of whom may have actively worked to ensure it did. Every individual Enclave character on this list is a product of what that institution selected for and rewarded across generations. Horrigan is not an anomaly within the Enclave, he is what it was building toward. The result, the question was planted at the start, and the answer is in the structure of everything that came after it. So here's what it all amounts to. Caesar is more dangerous than any of the others, even though the Master's plan would have killed more people and Richardson's FEV program would have killed essentially everyone, because his evil is infrastructure. The Legion runs on roads he built and armies he trained and social structures that function well enough to perpetuate themselves without him. And the cruelty is not incidental to the Legion, it's literally self-propagating, and you can't can't remove it and still have the same institution. As for whether understanding why someone did something changes whether it was evil, the franchise's answer, applied consistently across all 6 of these characters, is no. The Master understood his own compassion completely and believed in it sincerely, right up to the moment he chose to end his life, because his reason finally caught up with his certainty. His understanding of his intentions didn't change what he did to the people he absorbed or what his plan would have done to everyone else. An understanding is not lack of blame, and the franchise is careful about that distinction across every one of these stories. What connects all 6 of them is not scale or method, it's the absence of friction, and each of them followed their own logic to its conclusion with nothing in the world capable of checking them. And that is the specific thing the Wasteland provides that the pre-war world, with all its failures, at least partially, didn't. Tenpenny's logic was wealth and the immunity it creates. Autumn's was institutional pragmatism. The Master's was conviction applied without any testing. Horrigan's was the mission, with everything else stripped away by the people who built him. Elijah's was intelligence in isolation. Caesar's was history, specifically the parts he chose to treat as instructions. The Wasteland didn't create any of them. Tenpenny existed before the bombs, the same man with the same preferences, just with more people around to slow him down. The Master was Richard Grey before the Vats, a caravan trader with no particular destiny. Caesar was Edward Sallow before the Blackfoots, a follower of the apocalypse who believed knowledge could repair the world. Horrigan already had the psychotic incident before the FEV. The Wasteland just removed the friction that might have slowed them down or stopped them entirely, and not one of them wasted a single day of it. If you've enjoyed the video and want to see the 7 levels of death in Fallout, click the video on the screen.